And before we talk about the main topic, I really want to focus on the economy today. I do want to just mention the attack that took place at the U.S. Embassy in Yemen. Attack I strongly condemn. I honor the embassy guards who defended the compound, and my thoughts and prayers are with their victims and their families. And while I'm thankful that no Americans were killed, I'm deeply saddened by the loss of innocent life. It just reminds us that we have to redouble our efforts to root out and destroy international terrorist organizations and to make investments that keep us safe here in our homeland and our embassies around the world. And the attack reminds us that we're grateful for all Americans, military and civilian, who are in dangerous places all around the world and are serving us so well. So I hope everybody keeps them in mind. Now, obviously, this is a serious time. We're in the midst of two wars. We still have terrorist attacks that are taking place. But today I want to focus on the economy because the events of this week have shown that the stakes in this election could not be clearer. We are in the midst of the most serious financial crisis in generations. 3 of America's 5 largest investment banks have failed or been sold off in distress. We just learned yesterday that AIG, our biggest insurer, has now been taken over by the federal government. Our housing market is in a shambles. And Monday brought the worst losses on Wall Street since the day after September 11th. So Monday brought not only the worst losses since September 11th, but we also learned that the Fed had taken unprecedented action when it came to AIG, and it took these actions to prevent an even larger crisis. Now, we don't know all the details of the arrangement with AIG. The Federal Reserve must ensure that plans protect the families that count on insurance. And it should bolster our economy's ability to create good-paying jobs and help working Americans pay their bills and save their money. It must not bail out the shareholders or management of AIG that were making big profits when times were good. They shouldn't be bailed out when times are bad. So everywhere you look, the economic news is troubling. But for so many Americans, this really isn't news at all. 600,000 workers have lost their jobs since January. Home values are falling. And I don't need to tell you folks here in Elko that your paychecks don't go as far as they used to. It has never been harder to save or retire, to buy gas or to buy groceries. And if you put it on a credit card, they've probably raised your rates. In so many cities and towns across America, it feels as if the dream that so many generations fought for is slowly slipping away. Now, I have every confidence that we can steer ourselves out of this crisis. That's who we are. That's what we've always done as Americans. But the one thing I also know is this: we can't steer ourselves out of this crisis by heading in the same direction. We can't steer ourselves out of this crisis by taking the same disastrous road. And that's what this election's about. Now, this has been an interesting week for John McCain. It's been really interesting to watch him respond to this economic news. His first reaction to this crisis on Monday was to stand up and repeat the line that he said over and over and over again throughout this campaign. I quote, "The fundamentals of our economy are strong." Now, his campaign must have realized that probably this wasn't the smartest thing to say on the day of a financial meltdown. So they sent him back a few hours later to clean up his remarks. But it sounds like he got a little carried away, because yesterday, John McCain actually said that if he's president, he'll take on, and I quote, "the old boys network in Washington." I'm not making this up. This is somebody who's been in Congress for 26 years, who put 7 of the most powerful Washington lobbyists in charge of his campaign. And now he tells us that he's the one who's going to take on the Old Boys Network. The Old Boys Network. In the McCain campaign, that's called a staff meeting. Come on. So then John McCain went on to say how angry he was at the greedy corporate interests on Wall Street. He is so angry that he wants to punish them with $200 billion worth of tax cuts for them. And if they're not careful, he'll give them even more tax cuts for shipping our jobs overseas. I mean, who's he getting these lines from? The lobbyists who are running his campaign? Maybe it's Phil Gramm. Some of you know Phil Gramm, the man who was the architect of some of the deregulation in Washington that helped cause the mess on Wall Street, who, by the way, also happens to be the architect of John McCain's economic plan and one of his chief advisors. You remember Phil Gramm? He's the guy who said that we were just going through a mental recession and who called the United States of America a nation of whiners. All right, but we're not through because yesterday, John McCain's big solution to the crisis we're facing is, get ready for this, a commission. A commission. That's Washington speak for we'll get back to you later. Now, folks, we don't need a commission to figure out what happened. We know what happened. Too many in Washington and on Wall Street weren't minding the store. CEOs got greedy. Lobbyists got their way. Politicians sat on their hands until it was too late. We don't need a commission to tell us how we got into this mess. We need a president who will lead us out of this mess, and that's the kind of president I intend to be. So while John McCain isn't offering real solutions, he can't talk enough about how greedy Wall Street is and how he's going to take on the Old Boys Network in Washington. You know, at this rate, by the end of the week, John McCain and Phil Gramm, they're going to be talking about how they're going to grab those 7 lobbyists. They're going to plan to storm the Treasury Department with torches and pitchforks. Come on. I mean, this whole pretense that somehow he's going to take on these folks when he hasn't taken them on for the last 26 years because it's election time doesn't make much sense. Now, I certainly don't fault Senator McCain for all the problems that we're facing right now, but I do fault the economic philosophy he's followed for the last 26 years. It's a philosophy that says we should give more and more to those with the most and hope that prosperity trickles down. It's a philosophy that says even common sense regulations are unnecessary and unwise. It's a philosophy that lets Washington lobbyists shred consumer protections and distort our economy so it works for the special interests instead of working people. Now, let's be clear. What we've seen the last few days is nothing less than the final verdict on this failed philosophy, a philosophy that has not served the interests of the American people or the American economy. And Elko, I am running for President of the United States because the dreams of the American people must not be endangered anymore. It's time to put an end to the broken system in Washington that's breaking the American economy. It's time to change this country in a way that makes a real difference in your lives. That's why I'm running for president. You know, on this campaign, we have a different way of measuring the fundamentals of our economy. John McCain may think the fundamentals are good now because he's not looking at the right stuff. We know that the fundamentals that we use to measure economic strength are whether we're living up to that promise, that fundamental promise that has made this country great. That America is a place where you can make it if you try. That everyone should have a chance at their dreams. I know I wouldn't be standing here today without that promise. I know that's the promise we must keep once more. You know, when I talk to young veterans who come back from Iraq or Afghanistan, I see my grandfather, who signed up after Pearl Harbor, marched in Patton's Army in World War II, and was rewarded by a grateful nation with the chance to go back to college with a GI Bill. In the face of that young student who I meet, who sleeps just 3 hours after going to school before working the night shift, I think about my mom, a single mom who raised me and my sister on her own while she was working and earning her college degree, who once turned to food stamps but was still able to send us to the best schools in the country. And when I listened to another worker tell me about his factory that shut down, I remember all those men and women on the south side of Chicago who I stood by and fought for 2 decades ago after the local steel plant closed. Those are my heroes. Theirs are the stories that shape my life. And it's on their behalf that I intend to win this election and start fighting for working people when I get to the White House as president. You know, unlike Senator McCain, it didn't take a crisis on Wall Street for me to understand that folks are hurting out on Main Street. It was 2 years ago that I introduced legislation to stop mortgage transactions that promoted fraud and risk and abuse. It was 1 year ago that I called on our Treasury Secretary and our Fed Chairman to bring every stakeholder together and find a solution to the subprime mortgage meltdown before it got worse. In March, when John McCain was saying, "I'm always for less regulation," I called for a new 21st century regulatory framework to restore accountability and transparency and trust in our financial markets. You know, so I didn't wait until the day of a crisis to realize that we had some big problems on Wall Street and that they were affecting Main Street. And I believe that our free market has always been the engine of America's great progress. It's a market that's created a prosperity that is the envy of the world and rewarded the investors and risk takers who made America a beacon of science and technology and discovery. But the American economy has worked in large part because we have guided the market's invisible hand with a higher principle, that America prospers when all Americans can prosper. That's why I've put in place in this campaign, we've proposed rules of the road to make competition fair and honest and open. Our capital markets can't succeed without the public's trust. So it's time to get serious about regulatory oversight, and that's what I will do as president. We're going to make sure that those folks on Wall Street can't cut corners. We're going to make sure that they can't play a game where tails they win and heads you lose. We're not going to have a situation in which we are backing up their exorbitant risks. We want to make sure that we've got a financial system that is working to fund small businesses here in Elko, that's working to make sure that people can buy a home with a fair mortgage, that's making sure that young people can afford to go to college. That's what our financing system should be all about, making sure that we're creating good jobs and creating a good life for ordinary Americans. Now, to jumpstart job creation, I've proposed a $50 billion emergency economic plan that would save 1 million jobs by rebuilding our infrastructure and repairing our schools and helping our states and localities avoid damaging budget cuts. Put people back to work. To help people stay in their homes, I'm going to change our bankruptcy laws, and I'll offer a tax credit to struggling families that'll take 10% off your mortgage interest rate. I'll institute a home score system that will help every consumer figure out whether they'll be able to make their mortgage payments before they buy their house. And we are going to crack down on predatory lenders with tough new penalties that will treat mortgage fraud like the crime that it is. We've got to crack down on those folks. But the most important thing I will do as president is restore opportunity for all Americans. You know, to get our economy growing, we need to recapture that fundamental American promise that if you work hard, you can pay your bills. That if you get sick, you won't go bankrupt. That your kids can get a good education and go to college even if they're not rich. That we can leave a legacy of greater opportunity for future generations. That's the change that the American people need. You know, John McCain's been talking a lot about change lately, but it's just an empty slogan when you don't have policies to back it up. And the fact is, John McCain wants to continue the exact same economic policies that got us into this mess in the first place. That's not change, that's just a slogan. What we need is real fundamental change. And change means a tax code that doesn't reward the lobbyists who wrote it, but the American workers and small businesses who deserve it. So I'm going to stop. I will stop giving tax breaks to corporations that ship jobs overseas, and I will start giving them to companies that create good jobs right here in the United States of America. I will eliminate capital gains taxes for small businesses and startups. That's how we'll grow our economy and create the high-wage, high-tech jobs of tomorrow. And Elko, I want you to listen to me here. I will cut taxes for 95% of all working families. All right? John McCain's got a tax cut too. It's just for big corporations, including $4 billion for ExxonMobil. And he leaves 100 million Americans without a single dime of tax relief. That's not my agenda. I want to help working families, so 95% of families will get a tax cut. My opponent doesn't want you to know this, but under my plan, tax rates will actually be less than they were under Ronald Reagan. And if you make less than $250,000 a year, you will not see your taxes increase one single dime. Not one. In fact, I offer 3 times the tax relief for middle-class families as Senator McCain does. Because in an economy like this, the last thing we should do is raise taxes on the middle class. And I will finally keep the promise of affordable, accessible health care for every single American. Now, if you have health care, what my plan will do is lower your premiums. If you don't have health care, you're going to be able to get the same kind of coverage that members of Congress give themselves. And I will stop insurance companies from discriminating against those who are sick and need care the most. And Elko, I will create jobs, the jobs of the future, by transforming our energy economy. You know, ever since we started coming up here to campaign, you know, I've learned a lot about the mining industry, and I know how important it is. And you know what? I actually know what's in existing mining laws, because I noticed my opponent kind of fumbled the answer the last time he was asked about it. You know, we are going to make sure that we maintain industry here in Elko, but we've got to also look at the new energy economy of the future. We'll tap our natural gas reserves and invest in clean coal technology, and we're going to find ways to safely harness nuclear power. But we're also going to help our auto companies retool so that the fuel-efficient cars of the future are built right here in America, right here. And I'll make it easier for the American people to afford these new cars. And I want to invest $150 billion over the next decade in affordable, renewable sources of energy. Wind power, and right here, solar power, and the next generation of biofuels, an investment that will lead to new industries and 5 million new jobs that pay well, that cannot be outsourced. And Nevada will be at the forefront of solar energy if we've got some leadership in the White House, and that's what I intend to provide. And now's the time to finally meet our moral obligation to provide every child a world-class education, because it will take nothing less to compete in the global economy. So I'm going to recruit an army of new teachers, and we're going to pay them higher salaries, and we're going to give them more support. And in exchange, I'll ask for higher standards and more accountability. And we will give our promise to every young American: if you commit to serving in your community or your country, in the military or in the Peace Corps, or working in a veteran's home or in a homeless shelter, We will make sure you can afford to go to college. We will make sure that you've got the tuition to get your education. So this is the kind of change we need, the kind of bottom-up growth, the kind of innovation that will advance the American economy by advancing the dreams of all Americans. You know, times are hard. I don't need to tell you that. I'm not going to pretend that the change we need is going to come without a cost. Although I will tell you that I've presented ways that we can achieve all of the changes and all of the investments that I'm talking about in a fiscally responsible way. I know that we're going to have to overcome our doubts and our divisions, and we're going to have to fight against the determined opposition of powerful special interests. They don't want to see the status quo broken. They like things just the way they are. Oil companies are making record profits. Drug companies, insurance companies are doing just fine. So we're going to have to make sure that in order to bring about the change we need, that we push back, that we're able to not just change policies, but change our politics in Washington. That's the only way we can truly reform a broken economy and advance opportunity. But, Elko, I'm running for president because we simply can't afford 4 more years of an economic philosophy that has worked for Wall Street instead of Main Street and ends up devastating both. You know, now I'm going to protect Social Security. John McCain wants to privatize it. We're not going to do that. I don't want to wake up 4 years from now and find out that more Americans fell out of the middle class and more families lost their savings. I don't want to see that our country failed to invest in our ability to compete. Our children's future was mortgaged on another mountain of debt, and our financial markets failed to find a firmer footing. Now, this time, this election is our chance to stand up and say, enough is enough. We can do this. It's time for us to stand up and say enough. We are going to move in a new direction, and we have the confidence that we can do it because Americans have done this before. Time and again, we've battled back from adversity by recognizing that common stake we have in each other's success. That's why our economy hasn't just been the world's greatest wealth generator. It's bound America together. It's created jobs, and it's made the dream of opportunity a reality for generation after generation after generation of Americans. And now it falls to us. And Elko, I need you to make it happen. There's a reason. There's a reason we keep coming to Elko. You know, because in the past, presidential candidates don't come up here. Their attitude is, well, you know, if you're a Democrat, you go down to Vegas. If you're a Republican, I guess, I don't know, you just don't show up. But see, this place is like places all across the country. People who are working hard, who are giving back to their community, who are looking after their families, and have been forgotten, have been left out, haven't been listened to. See, I want you to join me. I want you to be a part of this process. I want you to have confidence that when we decide to bring about change, the special interests can't stop us, the lobbyists can't stop us. At the beginning of this campaign, I said I wouldn't take a dime from federal lobbyists, and everybody said, well, how are you going to fund your campaign? You funded it. They said we couldn't win because we didn't have endorsements, but you endorsed it. Those folks in Washington, they have not funded my campaign. They will not run my White House, and they will not drown out the voices of the American people when I am President of the United States, because I've got you. And if you want the next 4 years looking like the last 8, then I'm not your candidate. But if you want real change, if you want an economy that rewards work, and that works not just for Wall Street, but also for Main Street, if you want tax relief for the middle class and millions of new jobs, if you want health care you can afford and education so that your kids can compete, then Elko, I need you. I need you to go out and talk to your friends and talk to your neighbors. I want you to talk to them whether they're independent or whether they are Republican. I want you to argue with them and get in their face and If they tell you that, well, we're not sure where he stands on guns, I want you to say he believes in the Second Amendment. If they tell you, well, he's going to raise your taxes, you say, no, he's not, he's going to lower them. You are my ambassadors. You guys are the ones who can make the case. And if you'll knock on some doors with me and make some phone calls for me, then I promise you, we will not just win Nevada, we will win this general election, and you and I together, we're going to change this country and change the world. Thank you, everybody. God bless you. God bless America.